get it done. So 6-3 is estimating percents. Estimating percents. Some of us don't love it because we want the exact answer, but at least this way is going to be faster, especially if you don't have a calculator. So I'm going to first just give two strategies. I tried to take what the book said, narrow it down to what are two ways that they give you hints for how to do these. And we'll practice it on 3 of them, and then we're done. So first thing is strategies. And first one is going to be round the numbers to compatible numbers. So round numbers to compatible numbers. So round the numbers to compatible numbers. And really what they're saying there is pick numbers that nicely go into each other. Pick numbers that you could easily do in your head. And instead of writing that down, or I guess I could write pick numbers that work out nicely. Maybe I should, instead of saying pick, say round to numbers that work out nicely. So round to numbers that work nicely. If you can just round one number, that's nice. Otherwise, sometimes you'll have to round 2. You just want to be careful you're not rounding too much. But like an example for this would be if you have 16 over 30, and you're saying, well, what percent is that going to be? 16 over 30 is what percent? So 16 is a little over half of 30, so it's going to be a little bit more than 50%. But you could, if you were to change the 16, what's a number close to 16 you could easily divide by 30? 15. So one option would be to take and change this to 15 over 30. And 15 over 30 is going to give you a 0.5, which we then know is 50%. Right, that we take that decimal, if you think back to what we were doing before, to go from a decimal to a percent, you move the decimal point 2 places, and you get your 50%. That look familiar? The other option would be to say it's 16 over 32, and you'd still get the 0.5. So that's kind of what they mean by compatible numbers. Change one of them to try to make it be something that works out nicely. The second strategy they give is use a fraction that's close to the given percent. So use a fraction that's close to the given percent. And for those, in other words, if they're saying find 25% of this number or find a certain percent of this number, I'm just going to write out, well, if you're saying 25% of a number, 25% is what fraction?
1 over 4.
Nice, 1 over 4, because it's 0.25 or 1/4. So if you're trying to figure out 25% of 16, you're really doing 1/4 of 16, or 16 divided by 4. So sometimes that's helpful to take it from a percent to a fraction. If you were to have 50%, 50% is going to be 1/2. Another common one would be 33% is 1/3. 80%, and I'll stop writing them after this, 80% is 4/5. Nice. Because it's the same as 80% is 8 out of 10. And you could reduce 8/10 down to 4/5. So these are going to probably be best if you're trying to do this without a calculator. Otherwise, you just do 0.8 times your number and get it. All right, so that would be the second option. And the more of those fractions that you know, the more the percents you know to convert back and forth, the easier it's going to be. As opposed to having you try to memorize a whole bunch of them this year, I'm just going to say kind of keep your eyes and your brain open. And when you get one like that, we'll think, well, what is it? And then check it. I found that that's a good way to learn it for me. So practice. Let's do a couple of these. I'm going to say my first example. Estimate 24% of 81. So estimate 24% of 81. So 24% is Well, I guess, what would you do? Yeah, 25 is going to be a whole lot easier. If I say 25%, 25% of 81 is still going to be a little bit tough. You might want to say, I think I heard somebody, 25% of 80. Anybody do that one in their head? $20, nice. Do you agree 25% is 1/4? That's another way to do it. You could say, well, 25% is 1/4. So you have 1/4 times 80 would give you 20. But you could think, well, for me, how my brain does it is I cut it in half twice. If I think of like dollars, 25 cents is a quarter of a dollar. So if I start out with 4 quarters, half of that is 2. Half of that would get you down to your 1. So I say half of 80 is 40, half of 40 is 20. So the answer is 20. That's kind of how I do it in my brain.
Can you do it the way we did last, like in the last?
So 25 over 100 equals x over 80. The downfalls are trying to get a way that you can do it in your head fast without a calculator. So if once you do it this way, now you're doing 100x equals 25 times 80. And you could feasibly work through it that way in your head, but I'd try to come up with a way that's going to be more simple. Example 2. But if you're a purist and want like the right answer, you could even do that with the right numbers. I'm going to say 9% of 800. Some of you will do this really fast. Some of you haven't internalized the trick. But 9% is going to be a beast, but what percent's not? So you could say this here is really 10%. And 800 is a pretty decent number, so we'll just leave it as the 800. 10% of 800, anyone in their head? I think I heard it. Not 8, but 80, yep. Because 10%, you move the decimal point 1 place. So, because 10% is the same as 1/10, you could say. So you move the decimal point over 1, you get your 80. Nice. And one final one. They could say, what percent of the object is shaded? So what percent is shaded? And I'll try to draw in something that looks fairly believable. So I'm going to start with a rectangle, and I'm going to cut it in half vertically, and cut each of those halves in half, and then cut it in half horizontally too. If I have something like that there. So I take my rectangle, break it up into 8 boxes, and I shade 3. How would you get that to a percent? Not if it's what percent is shaded. We don't say it like a 3-to-5 ratio. We say it's 3 out of 8. What do you do there? You have it, Ethan? If you could use your calculator, that'd be the way to do it. Is you punch that in and do that'd be 0.375, and 0.375 is what percent? Perfect. So 37.5%. If you don't know that, I'm going back to see which ones I wrote before. I'm going back to like CAD days. I guess I didn't write it down. A fraction that I found comes in handy is if you know that 1/8 is 0.125. That's one that pops up surprisingly often, I've found. So if you're using your calculator, yep, Ethan's way would totally work. That'd be the best way to do it with a calculator. If you didn't have that, if you know 1/8 is 0.125, now you have 3/8. You could just multiply that by 3. So the 1 times 3 is going to be 3, and then 25 times 3 is 75. So 0.375. Or you could do it more of a normal way. But